What are the odds? Two massive steamships from the same company, crossing the vast North Atlantic, collide in the dead of a summer night. The Geiser and the Thingvalla, sister ships bound by fate, met with devastating consequences. How did this maritime tragedy unfold? Join us as we dive into the harrowing tale of an unimaginable and improbable collision. In this lethal tale of the sea, we delve into one of the most unlikely collisions in the annals of maritime history. One sister ship taking out the other. In this tragic narrative, we will encounter our historical composites, serving as avatars of those who would have sailed aboard liners of the day. They include Cecilia, a young bride driven to desperation as she tries to escape the doomed vessel, and Ernst, a man simply wishing to see home again when the cruel hand of fate turned against them. Let us go aboard. The North Atlantic in August 1888 was a vast expanse of unpredictable waves and dense fog, a place where sight could fail even the most vigilant captain. The Thingvalla line, renowned for its Danish steamers, operated several vessels on this treacherous route, ferrying hopeful immigrants and goods between Europe and America. Among these was the sturdy Geiser, a steamship built in Copenhagen in 1882. She was a solid vessel with twin engines, capable of a respectable speed, though her years of service were beginning to show. This voyage was to be her last. A new ship awaited to take her place once she completed her journey to New York. Commanded by Captain Carl W. Muller, the Geiser carried a mixed cargo, along with 129 Copenhagen-bound passengers sharing cramped quarters. Ahead on approximately the same route was the Thingvalla, a sister ship in the fleet that proudly bore the name of the line. Built in 1884, the Thingvalla was a larger vessel, weighing 1,045 tons and outfitted with more powerful engines that allowed her to slice through the waves at a swifter pace. Captain P.J. Lobb was in command and heading for New York, guiding his ship with a crew experienced in North Atlantic crossings. It was in the fog-laden early hours of August 14th that these two leviathans converged off the coast of Nova Scotia, at a point near latitude 43 degrees, 26 north, and longitude 60 degrees 5 west. The ocean was in the grip of half-gale. Winds and heavy showers in the seas off eastern Canada. Each vessel moved forward at top speed, unknowingly inching toward disaster. On the Thingvalla, Captain Laub peered into the fog, his hand resting tensely on the wheel as he listened for sounds beyond the mist. While on the Geiser, Captain Muller strained his ears, his eyes scanning the blackness ahead. Though both vessels had lookouts stationed and navigational lights burning, the heavy fog rendered these precautions nearly useless. The damp veil swallowed up the light, allowing them to see nothing but vague shapes within an arm's reach of the bow. Each captain trusted their training and experience, unaware that fate was steering them closer to each other with every passing moment. Below deck, in the sleeping quarters, passengers drifted between restless dreams and brief awakenings to the soft creak of wood and the steady hum of the ship's engines. For many, this voyage held the promise of new beginnings. For some, it was a journey back to familiar shores. As the ship's clock struck 4 in the morning, the promise was shattered by a sudden deafening impact. A thunderous crash split the silence, a sound so brutal it was like the world tearing in half. Passengers were thrown from their bunks, gasping in shock as wood splintered and metal groaned. In an instant, the Thingvalla, with her greater speed and weight, had plowed into the Geiser's starboard side, tearing through her hull as if it were paper. Survivors would later describe the hole as big enough for a trio of elephants to walk through. Scores of passengers in the afflicted area drowned instantly in their sleep. The force of the collision was tremendous, leaving no doubt of the catastrophe's severity. On the bridge, Captain Mueller stumbled, his hands grasping desperately at the railing as the ship lurched violently beneath him. His mind registered the unimaginable. The Geiser was mortally wounded. The look on his face changed from disbelief to a grim acceptance. Ernst, a wiry German carpenter traveling alone for his first visit back to Europe after immigrating to America 10 years before, stirred in his bunk as the ship surged through the waves. He had been dreaming of family and friends he had not seen in many years, and longing for the sweet smell of his mother's baking bread. Ernst was jolted awake, thrown against the wall of his bunk with such force that his shoulder throbbed. He lay there for a moment, stunned, before the cold shock of seawater lapping at his wrist from the one arm hanging down from the side of his berth, which jolted him fully awake. Disoriented and bruised, he staggered to his feet, his adrenaline pumping as the cold water surged up his legs. "God in heaven," he gasped, the words barely escaping his lips as panic seized him. Nearby, Peter, his bunkmate, a young man hoping to seek his fortune in Europe, was also struggling to regain his footing, clutching at the wall for support. What's happened?" Peter stammered, his face ghostly white and his voice tight with fear. Ernst's mind raced as he processed the chaos around him. "Collision!" he shouted, his teeth chattering. "We've got to get above deck, now!" The water was rising fast, spilling into every corner of the lower decks, stoking panic everywhere within the confined spaces. As Ernst and Peter stumbled toward the staircase, they could hear the screams and shouts of other passengers waking up to the same nightmare. But the seawater was faster than they could have imagined. Just as Ernst reached for Peter's arm, a sudden swell surged through the corridor, sweeping them both off their feet. Ernst lost sight of his friend in the dark, cold flood, his last moments a blur of water and darkness as he was swept under, never to resurface. 2 doors down, in the women's quarters, Cecilia Anderson awoke with a start as the impact reverberated through the vessel. She had fallen asleep clutching a small locket, a token from her recent wedding that she had intended to keep close until she reunited with her husband Lars. They had honeymooned in the bustling city of New York, but their enjoyment had been cut short when Lars had been summoned back to Europe early on business, and insisted that she enjoy the rest of their trip, even if he were not there. Reluctantly, she had agreed, but was happy to be on her way home, and the thought of their future had sustained her through the long journey. But now, with the menacing water seeping under the door, that dream felt as fragile as a spider's web. No, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. Her heart raced as she scrambled out of bed, gathering her skirts in her fists as she struggled to keep her balance. Around her, other women were also waking, some crying out as the reality of their situation dawned. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Marta Jensen, a middle-aged governess shepherding a young boy named Theo to his grandparents in Denmark. Theo, barely 12, was clutching Marta's hand, his face pale with terror as the incoming ocean rose around his ankles. "Miss Marta, what do we do?" he whimpered, his adolescent voice trembling. Marta squeezed his hand, fighting to keep her own fear at bay. "We find our way out, Theo," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Hold tight to me, and don't let go, no matter what." Together they pushed forward, joining the stream of panicked passengers struggling against the rising tide that now surged knee-deep through the dim corridors. But fate was merciless. As they neared the staircase, a massive swell burst through the corridor, separating Cecilia from Marta and Theo. Cecilia's scream was cut short as the deluge swept her away into the stairwell. She lived, but Marta, clutching Theo's hand tightly, was engulfed as the surge overtook them. And their end came quickly, sparing them the agony of a prolonged struggle in the indifferent water. On the bridge, with the screams of women and the wailing of children assaulting his ears, Captain Muller was barking orders. His expression one of steely resolve as he struggled to maintain control of his sinking ship. "Ready the lifeboats, get the passengers topside," he commanded, his voice carrying over the din of chaos. Yet even as he spoke, he knew the truth. His ship's time was numbered in minutes, not hours. The gaping hole left by the Thingvalla had allowed an unstoppable torrent to rush in with astonishing speed, flooding the lower decks with a relentless flow that spread like poison through the ship's veins. Any attempt to stop the flooding would prove futile, as if the ocean itself were determined to drag the geyser down. The two boats had separated after the impact, but the damage was irreversible. In that instant, Muller felt a profound ache as he looked at his stricken vessel, watching her struggle like a wounded animal, rocking back and forth in her death throes, sinking deeper with every wave that crashed over her. He knew she was lost. As frightened passengers rushed the lifeboat stations, the crew worked feverishly to lower them. But in the chaotic confusion, amid the panicked screams and desperate pleas, only one managed to be successfully launched. It was a race against time, with crew and passengers piling into the small vessel, clinging to each other as their only lifeline. On deck, Cecilia Anderson, having survived the flooding, had fought her way outside and, driven by a desperate hope, peered frantically around for any boat being launched. But there was none. Seeing the one lifeboat that had gotten away bobbing in the area below, she was gripped by a reckless determination. Without hesitation, Cecilia leapt over the side, hitting the mid-50-degree water, her limbs instantly numbed by the cold. She swam with all her might toward the promise of salvation, each stroke slower than the last as exhaustion set in. Halfway to her goal, the swells continued to sap her strength as she fought to keep swimming. Her arms fell slack, and wordlessly she slipped beneath the waves, her last thoughts clinging to the memory of Lars. They watched her demise from the lifeboat, shivering, drenched, and wide-eyed with horror. Turning away from Cecilia's heartbreaking fate, the castaways gaped at the geyser as their ship, their refuge on this journey, surrendered to the black, pitiless depths of the Atlantic, carrying with it dozens of souls to rest in the depths some 30 miles south of Sable Island. Meanwhile, on the Thingvalla, Captain Laub had brought his damaged ship to a stop. Realizing the gravity of what had just transpired, standing on the deck, he surveyed the carnage in the night. The once calm ocean now littered with debris and bobbing bodies. The collision had left a 20-foot gash in his bow, visibly marking the catastrophe. But the Thingvalla was still afloat, her engines still beating beneath him. As the dawn began to break, casting a pale glow over the surface, Lob took a deep breath and barked orders to his crew. "Lower boats! We search for survivors!" The men responded immediately, launching small boats to comb through the wreckage. They pulled from the chilly water those they could, numb from cold and shock, their faces etched with astonishment and grief. By sunrise, 14 passengers and 17 crew members from the Geiser had been rescued and brought aboard. They were a broken, haunted group, clutching each other for warmth and comfort, the cries of the lost echoing in their minds. The rest had been claimed by the callous dark sea, leaving an emptiness that words could not fill. A few hours later, the German steamship Wieland arrived as the morning sun cast a wan light through the clouds over the churning waters. Laub transferred the survivors to the larger vessel under the mastery of Captain Albers of the Hamburg American Packet Line, which would take them onward to New York. Exhausted and broken, the survivors still clung to each other, the cries of those lost haunting them without mercy. The Thingvalla limped away, heading for Halifax, her once proud hull scarred by the disaster. When Captain Lob finally reached port, he gave his account of the tragedy, expressing sorrow for the lives lost and frustration over the events that led to the collision. A full accounting revealed that both ships had signal lights burning and lookouts at their posts. The inescapable fact was there should not have been a collision. The only conclusion that could be drawn was the time-honored tradition of simple bad luck at sea and possible negligence on behalf of the helmsman and the lookouts, especially since it was established that the Geiser and the Thingvalla had general knowledge of each other's sailing plans and probable locations. Later reports would suggest that the collision could have been avoided had the two ships adhered to the navigational recommendations set forth by the U.S. Hydrographic Office, which had emphasized the importance of separate east-west tracks in the North Atlantic. Ultimately, though, out of the 137 souls aboard the Geiser, only 31 survived that fateful night. The tragedy served as a grim reminder of the unforgiving nature of the sea and the razor-thin line between fortune and misfortune on the vast, indifferent ocean. Those aboard the Geiser had tragically fallen on the wrong side of that line and were now united for all eternity with the same haunting epitaph. The sea is my grave. My grave is the sea. Thank you for joining us. It's time to pull up anchor now. But if you would enjoy more dramatized retellings, please be sure to comment, like, share, and subscribe, so that we may bring you more harrowing tales of the sea. And be sure to check out more of our shipwrecks on this channel.